What is the normal routine or daily setup for your control room broadcast?
Well, the crew call is usually 3 hours before an event, which is necessary because we're student driven and students have classes and such during the day and work part-time. If it were a professional crew call, there'd probably be 6 or 7 hours of prep time for the type of stuff we're doing, just so you can test everything out to a different degree and do a little bit more pre-production than we have time for. But crew calls about 3 hours before the event begins. We try and get all the cameras set up, the mics and communication equipment tested. We also want to let the cameras warm up before we do color calibration and white balancing. Then we want to also have some meetings. The director needs to talk to the camera operators to kind of go over with what he's looking for, what she's looking for from each position, particularly when there's new people. One of the things that we're dealing with is students are learning, so the experience level of a crew for any given game can change drastically. We've had games where all 4 cameras were operated by people that had never operated camera before. Some nights we have experienced folks, so the directors need to be able to deal with both kinds of shows.
Right. What are some of the challenges your game day crew face?
Trying to do a professional level show in a lot less time than an ESPN or a CBS or a Fox truck production crew would go through. The graphics is probably an area where we could, with more time, do a lot more elaborate things, but for starters, it's a pretty tough learning curve to get students up to speed on the advanced graphics capabilities of our equipment, and it also takes time. So if we were a professional production truck, those graphics would be being built over the course of days. We're doing it over the course of hours. The main goal is we're using, it's a student crew, so it's more beneficial for students to get the experience than it would be to require them to be there 5-6 hours before a game begins. Many wouldn't be able to accommodate that, and in 3 hours students can learn a lot, and then you have the actual event itself to learn from.
In the control room, your staff obviously have a lot of equipment. How do you guys go about funding for the cameras or requesting anything new?
All the equipment is the athletic department, and that trickles down through the ASUN conference, who has an agreement with ESPN that they just renewed with the addition of ESPN Plus as a platform that we're producing content for. So the initial expenditure for equipment was in the $200,000 to $300,000 range, and that equated to the control room, the cabling and fiber wiring that was required to get to camera positions, the table along the sidelines where the play-by-play and color analysts sit, the communication wiring that was required there. Within the control room we have audio, a replay system, graphics, a switcher for directing, and an engineering and camera shading area. So it's professional capable. The equipment is top-notch. It's really great that students can get their hands on it. It's more advanced than our studio in the building is, so any production student that just limits themselves to what goes on in the studio in our building is probably at a competitive disadvantage against their classmates that are actually going over and producing events with us in the arena.
How do you feel live streaming has changed sports broadcasting in regards to less views on TV compared to more consumers going into streaming?
It's fragmented the audience. I mean, if you look at the number of people streaming an ASUN game, it's not Monday Night Football. It's not North Carolina Duke basketball. It's a much smaller audience. But what the changing dynamics of not just the linear technology, it's the internet. So how ESPN and others are looking at this, if you have 60 events being streamed, they're selling that to advertisers as a total audience. So you might be watching UNF play Florida Gulf Coast, you're going to get the same ads that everybody else that's watching a basketball game or a volleyball game that night are. So it might, 5 or 6,000 people might be streaming our event, but when you add it up with the other, 80 or so, there might be several 100,000 viewers in play, and you can sell those numbers to advertisers.
Right.